It is I, John O'Regan, the uncommon voice for the common man, coming to you today live from Shadyside, Ohio, where I have more than a few things to say about Hurricane Isaac and how it relates to Hurricane Katrina, the Republican National Convention, and, of course, George W. Bush. There are very few things that get my dander up, like the blaming of George W. Bush on everything that happened in Hurricane Katrina. And once again, with the Republican National Convention and Hurricane Isaac, you hear these idiots on NBC sit there and once again talk about what F. Chuck Todd called the specter of Hurricane Katrina and Bush's failure hanging over the Republican National Convention. And therefore, it is my duty to point out a few facts about what actually did happen in Hurricane Katrina, because you and I know that the media will not tell you the entire story. They are nothing but puppets of the Democrats in the Obama administration and will use any tragedy, anything they can to try and make Republicans look bad. But I got a few other things to say about NBC News, but I'll get to that in just a second. Now, as far as it goes, let's go back and see what actually did happen, because these are the facts. Before the hurricane hit, our president, George W. Bush, was on the phone to Democrat Governor Kathleen Blanco and asked her if she needed anything before it even hit. Blanco said the situation was under control. They didn't need any federal help. That's a fact. Then when the hurricane hit, it turns out that the levees in an impoverished ward, I think it was the first ward, the impoverished ward, the levees there broke, flooded it, caused all cost of loss of life and everything. And of course, somehow, some way, George Bush's response to that was pathetic, because he was letting black people drown in New Orleans. That is exactly the line that these worthless people in the media use. But there's a few little facts about that, too, that the media won't tell you. Apparently, that there was some federal money through the Army Corps of Engineers that was given to the state of Louisiana to reinforce those levees. But, of course, those funds were misused. In fact, some schools of thought have them using that money that was supposed to reinforce the levees to build a causeway over Lake Pontchartrain, in direct violation of what the money was supposed to be used to in the first place. So when the levees collapsed, these damn Democrats are running around in panic. And then the truth came out about what they did with the funds from the Army Corps of Engineers. And guess who was behind that scandal? That's right, the Democrats. Now, here's a little fact that the media and NBC and everybody avoids talking about, but it is the truth. Those African Americans that lived in that impoverished ward have been living there since the days of Huey P. Long, a Democrat. Decades that these African Americans have been languishing in poverty in this ward. Now, when the levees collapsed and there was all that chaos and confusion, if you ask me, their worthless governor had wanted absolutely nothing to be seen down in there. In fact, some reports say that the American Red Cross and the Salvation Army were poised on the runways to go down into the French Quarter and help those people. But Blanco was afraid that the world would see just exactly what those poor African Americans were living in, and that was poverty. That's right. She was afraid that the world would see the kind of appalling conditions that those African Americans were living in and the chaos that was ensuing in there, and did not want that to stain the reputation of her beloved state. Even though it's her political party that allowed those African Americans to live in poverty for decades. Now you understand why she was a little bit slow in accepting George Bush's commitment to put federal troops in there. And actually, as it turns out, Bush was willing to federalize all those troops because it was obvious that the Democrats had things in such a clusterfuck that they couldn't make details out of anything that was going on there. Now, you remember Ray Nagin? Remember Ray Nagin and his evacuation plan? You know what their evacuation plan was? This is what the Democrats thought up of as their evacuation plan for New Orleans in case it was hit by a hurricane. A, drive out of low-lying areas. Drive out. If that doesn't work, take public transportation. And if you can't drive out and public transportation doesn't exist because of a state of emergency, just walk to the Superdome. And that's it. That was their evacuation plan. That's what the Democrats came up for all these impoverished African Americans that lived in that war. That was it. And that's it. Even the Times-Picayune, the local Democrat paper, was appalled at the evacuations plans. And this is a Democrat paper criticizing Democrats. Yes, now let us remember this. Before this thing hit and after the levees break, how many hundreds of school buses were there that were flooded? And Ray Nagin just let it go on? Those school buses could have been used to evacuate people, to get them out of the low-lying areas. Remember, most of New Orleans is below sea level. But they don't teach that in the public schools, but it's true. And that is exactly what happened. Hundreds of school buses flooded, useless, ruined. And they could have been used to evacuate people. But they just sat there in the still waters, and nobody says anything about what Nagin did not do. Hell, he was right across the street from his office in a hotel, more worried about evacuating his white rich friends than he was his own people down in the First Ward. And all those school buses sat there, flooded and ruined, and it was his fault. But we don't want to talk about that because Nagin has a D beside his name. Oh, my God. And somehow, some way, this is all George Bush's fault. When the fact of the matter is, most of the chaos and confusion and loss of life and property was the damn fault of the Democrats, not George Bush. Hell, nobody knew those people were living in poverty until the hurricane hit. And that's why that worthless Blanco didn't want anybody to see it. And that's the fact of the matter. But you're not going to hear this from the media because they don't want the Democrats to get a stain and the blood on their hands, which they do. Now, as for NBC News. Now, do you really think that NBC News has any credibility at all about anything? Really? Seriously? I mean, after the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman thing where they're doctoring the videos and rearranging the 9/11 calls so that it makes Zimmerman look like he's a racist? Yes. So how do you think NBC News has any credibility about anything? And with that being said, any news organization that puts on their website that former astronaut Neil Young is dead at the age of 82 has no journalistic credibility whatsoever. Until next time, this is your favorite conservative, Ronald Reagan, saying this to you now. Don't ever listen to anything NBC News says, because they are nothing but a bunch of damn left-wing losers who give journalism a bad name. Until next time, I say this now, over